There are moments that exist entirely outside the basketball season that remind you with complete and undeniable clarity what Caitlin Clark has become. Not just as a player, not just as a commercial force within the WNBA, but as a genuine, broad-based, cross-demographic cultural phenomenon whose reach and resonance extend far beyond the sport she plays and the league that employs her.
Caitlin, I'm here at the Indy 500 with all my friends. Excited to be here for the first time.
The Indianapolis 500 is one of those reminders, and what happened on race day at one of the most iconic sporting events in the world deserves to be examined with the full weight it carries. Let us start with the designation itself, because the significance of being named Grand Marshal of the Indianapolis 500 deserves direct and honest acknowledgement before anything else is discussed. The Grand Marshal of the Indianapolis 500 is not a casual promotional assignment handed to whoever's publicist made the right call at the right moment. It is a deliberate, visible, considered statement by the organizers of one of sport's most storied traditions about who represents the cultural energy, the public fascination, and the mainstream appeal that this institution wants associated with its most important day of the year. The Indianapolis 500 has been running for over a century. It draws a globally diverse audience. It occupies a position in American sporting culture that extends across generations, across regional boundaries, and across the full demographic spectrum of sports fandom. The people who run this event looked at the landscape of American sports and culture. They identified who was generating the most genuine, widespread, and cross-demographic public attention right now. And they chose a women's basketball player. Not a motorsport legend, not a mainstream entertainment celebrity, Caitlin Clark.
What are you going to say today?
Drivers, pause. To your car! Your car! Cars now!
That decision is a statement. It should be understood and acknowledged as exactly what it is. Institutional recognition at the highest level of a globally significant sporting event of what Caitlin Clark represents in this specific cultural moment. Now let us examine what actually happened at the event, because the details of Clark's appearance at the Indianapolis 500 transform every abstract conversation about her cultural impact into something concrete, observable, and impossible to intellectually dismiss. Thousands of fans were present at the Indianapolis 500 on race day. That is the baseline context, a massive sporting event with an enormous, diverse, globally engaged audience physically present at the venue. Within that context, when Caitlin Clark appeared, the reaction was precisely what anyone who has been honestly tracking her career trajectory would have expected, and precisely what anyone who has been operating in denial about the scope of her impact should have witnessed as a definitive and unambiguous correction. Fans surrounded her. The security infrastructure required to manage the crowd around her was extensive and visible, the kind of protection protocols associated with figures who generate immediate, intense, and widespread public interest wherever they appear. The autograph lines were substantial. The photographs and videos that circulated from the event captured, in real time and without curation or editorial framing, what thousands of fans responding to one person's presence at a public event actually looks like. This is not a manufactured media moment. This is what Caitlin Clark generating organic crowd response at the Indianapolis 500 looks like when documented from multiple angles by multiple observers who were simply present to witness it. This was Clark's first Indianapolis 500, which adds a dimension of genuine milestone significance to the occasion. She attended as Grand Marshal, in a ceremonial capacity, not as a participant in the race itself. To be clear about the role, Clark was there to represent the spirit and the cultural moment of the event, to serve as the public face of one of motorsport's most celebrated traditions, and to bring her own extraordinary fan base into contact with a sporting institution that has existed for over a century. She was not behind the wheel of a racing vehicle. She was front and center in the public role that the Grand Marshal designation carries, and she filled that role in a manner that generated the kind of crowd response that confirms why the designation was extended to her in the first place. The personal dimension of this occasion is also significant and deserves acknowledgement. Reports indicate that Clark's family, parents, aunts, uncles, and other close relatives traveled to Indianapolis specifically for this moment. The fact that family members made the journey to be present reflects the genuine weight of the occasion. This is not a routine public appearance in the context of an ordinary promotional calendar. This is a milestone. A player who has built something extraordinary in a city that has embraced her completely, being honored by one of that city's most globally recognized institutions, with the people who were there from the beginning present to share the moment. That is a meaningful human story wrapped inside a significant cultural event, and it deserves to be acknowledged as both things simultaneously, rather than as just a sports media item. Lexi Hall was also present at the Indianapolis 500, appearing to have come out specifically to support Clark at this occasion. Hall's attendance alongside Clark at an event of this magnitude in a context that has nothing to do with basketball or the competitive demands of the WNBA season reflects a genuine personal connection that exists between these two people independent of what happens on the court. That kind of teammate support, showing up for someone's significant moment in a completely different sporting and cultural context, is worth noting because it says something real about the human relationships within this team that does not always surface through the lens of competitive analysis. Rob Doster, identified as connected to Clark's personal development and training work, was also reported to be present. The gathering of professional support staff, teammates, and family around Clark for this specific occasion reflects the kind of network that surrounds a player who is operating at the level Clark is operating at. People who are invested in her success across multiple dimensions and who show up for the meaningful moments regardless of whether those moments happen inside a basketball arena. The Indy 500 broadcast on Fox also carries its own dimension of significance within the context of this story. A nationally broadcast race featuring Caitlin Clark as Grand Marshal represents an audience crossover that the WNBA's commercial partners and broadcast affiliates should be paying very close attention to. The people watching the Indianapolis 500 on Fox are not, in their majority, the same people who tune in specifically for WNBA games. They are a different audience, a broader, more varied, motorsport-oriented national audience, and Clark's presence in the Grand Marshal role puts her in front of that audience in a context where the association is positive, prominent, and nationally visible. That is commercial exposure of a kind that money cannot simply purchase. It has to be earned through the kind of cultural standing that Clark has built through her performance, her personality, and her authentic connection to the communities she represents. Now let us connect this Indianapolis 500 moment to the season's broader narrative because the connection is direct and it is important. The same week that featured organizational controversy, the league investigation into injury disclosure practices, the attendance figures that documented the lowest single-game turnout of the Clark era, and the broader fan trust crisis that has defined this season. That same week also featured Caitlin Clark shutting down the Indianapolis 500 with crowds surrounding her for autographs, a red carpet rolled out in her honor, and a security presence that reflected the genuine level of public intensity her presence generates. That parallel tells you everything you need to know about the gap between what Caitlin Clark is as a cultural and commercial entity and what the Indiana Fever organization has been doing with, and in some cases doing to, that entity across this season. The city of Indianapolis recognizes what it has. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway organization recognizes what it has. The fans who traveled specifically to see the Grand Marshal at race day recognize what they are witnessing. And the crowds, the security, the autograph lines, the red carpet, all of it is the physical manifestation of that recognition in the most public, most undeniable, most real-world form available. This moment also reinforces, in the most direct possible way, the commercial reality that has been at the center of every conversation about the Indiana Fever and the WNBA this season. The player who generates crowd responses requiring extensive security protocols at the Indianapolis 500 at a motorsport event, not a basketball game, in front of an audience that does not primarily identify as WNBA fans, is the same player whose absence from a single Indiana Fever game produced the lowest attendance of her entire era and secondary market ticket prices that found no buyers at $8.35. Both of those data points are measurements of the same underlying reality from opposite directions. The Indianapolis 500 crowd measures what Caitlin Clark's presence generates. The Portland fire attendance figures measure what Clark's absence costs. The gap between those two measurements is not a mystery, not a coincidence, and not something that can be explained through any framework other than the straightforward acknowledgement that Caitlin Clark is the commercial engine of the Indiana Fever and one of the most valuable individual assets in women's professional sports right now. The audience that follows Clark is not geographically constrained to Indianapolis. It is not limited to women's basketball fans. It is not confined to any demographic category, regional preference, or existing sports affiliation. It is a broad, genuinely national, cross-demographic community of people who have made a decision about where their sports investment and their cultural attention are going. And that community will show up for Caitlin Clark wherever she appears, in whatever context, at whatever event she is associated with. The Indianapolis 500 just demonstrated that on one of sport's biggest stages. The most recent game before the Indy 500 weekend also provides the competitive context for this off-court moment. Clark posted 22 points and 9 assists in the Valkyries game, a near double-double performance that continued her season-long pattern of elite individual output against every opponent on the schedule. She came into race weekend having just delivered one of her most complete performances of the current season, and she arrives at the Indianapolis 500 with her competitive and cultural profile both operating at levels that justify every public honor and institutional recognition being extended in her direction. The Indy 500 Grand Marshal moment is the most emphatic off-court demonstration of Clark's cultural standing that this season has produced. Not what statistical analysis says about her production, not what secondary market pricing says about her commercial value, not what attendance figures say about the dependency relationship between this franchise's viability and her availability. What thousands of actual human beings gathered at one of the world's most significant sporting events, choosing to stand in lines and wait for autographs and fill the frame of every camera at the event with their presence, says about who she is and what she means in this specific cultural moment. The basketball resumes. The season continues. The organizational questions that have defined this turbulent year do not disappear because race weekend delivered a spectacular and affirming public moment. The coaching questions remain. The fan trust issues remain. The league investigation into disclosure practices remains an open and consequential matter. All of that is still present and still demanding honest examination. But the Indianapolis 500 Grand Marshal appearance, the crowds, the security presence, the autograph lines, the red carpet that was brought out specifically for her arrival, the family gathered from out of town to share the occasion, the teammate who showed up to be there for the moment, the national broadcast audience encountering her in a motorsport context. That appearance is evidence that requires no statistical framework or commercial data analysis to interpret. The evidence is the crowd. The evidence is thousands of fans at a race event standing in lines for the person who was named Grand Marshal. The evidence is a city that has given Caitlin Clark one of its most prominent ceremonial honors, and a player who arrived to receive it surrounded by family, supported by teammates and professional staff, with a security footprint that reflects exactly the level of public impact she generates everywhere she goes. The basketball court is where she does her most important work. But the Indianapolis 500 is where this particular weekend confirmed, one more time and in front of one more enormous and diverse audience, that the work she does on that court has built something far larger than the sport itself. The crowd showed up for Caitlin Clark at the Indianapolis 500 on one of sport's biggest days. And that, as clearly as anything that has happened this entire season, tells you exactly what she is and exactly what she means.